Daithí Ó. Welcome to another episode of the Candlelit Tales podcast, where we are once again talking about rivers and lakes and waterways.
And we are, talking about various things because that's what we do on this podcast. Remember we said we're going to do that? We tell Irish stories and we talk about them afterwards.
Well, you see, we changed the construction of we tell Irish stories and talk about them afterwards because we used to do a conversation for every podcast and then we stopped doing that.
I thought you wanted to script this intro and have it really neat and
yeah, but this is the chat podcast, isn't it the same?
So we don't do a repeated intro for the chat podcast.
I mean, we do a bit. We always say Daithí Ó.
We're just confusing our listeners at this stage.
I don't know. Are you confused? I don't think they're confused.
Let us know if
I think they know
confused.
what's happening. If you don't know what's happening, welcome to the first episode you've ever heard of the Candlelit Tales podcast, where we tell stories from Irish mythology and then sometimes discuss them.
Intermittently, before or after, without really telling you which one we're doing.
Because we keep changing our minds and sometimes we record the podcast, the chat podcast, before we've recorded the story and sometimes after.
So we're doing a bit of both today. But
and sometimes we do the story and then we record the chat and then we go, actually, now that we've talked about it, I want to do it a different way. And then we re-record it.
Yeah.
So
we won't, let's
super
not
structured.
Get bogged down.
Super structured.
We're on it.
are.
Thanks very much for joining us, and you're listening from wherever you're listening. And I hope that you've maybe found us from a recommendation, or if you like the podcast, you might recommend it to a friend. And, always a bit of a shout out to the people who support us on patreon.com/Candlelit Tales, because they're super sound. And they also get a private once a month Zoom call with us where we chat about all of the really structured and organised things that we do in Candlelit Tales.
It's very fun. It's a very nice chat. We have nice chats. People show us their pets. And last time our mum just came and hung out with us.
Yeah, it was
because we were in Cork. If you want to just hang out with us for an hour every month, you can join us on Patreon.
Also thing. And not that we're bribing you with our time or anything, but we're basically bribing you with our time.
That's all we do.
What we do. So we're here to talk about a few of the waterways of Ireland, and we're going to start with a chat about the Blackwater podcast, Sorcha, that you told to me while you were recording.
I did. I got Aron to sit into the studio because I was like, it was one of those ones that we haven't told in front of an audience, and sometimes with those I prefer there being a person that I can talk to.
It keeps your mind a little bit more focused. I found being left alone with a story I'd actually told plenty, even just not having someone in the room, I get more waffly. So
you do get more waffly, whereas when you're looking at somebody and they start going, all right, been a bit descriptive there for a minute. Not that you were doing that. You were mostly closing your eyes and just listening to the story, which was nice.
It was lovely.
I kind of felt like I needed an audience because it was a new one. A couple of the ones this series have been new ones for me.
Loads of new ones for me.
There's loads of new ones. I keep being like, oh fuck, I think I'm running out of material, and then going, oh no, there's millions.
Yeah, and then I find a book like last night.
You went on a skite last night, having decided, actually quite definitively told me last week that you're not doing research anymore because you're not good at it and you don't like doing it. And then
I think I just had to say that just to
you take the pressure off yourself.
And then suddenly I spent 3 hours reading books.
You do. To be fair, you do that occasionally.
Yeah.
And then you go back to, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I want to do it ever.
Or I go listening to lots of stories.
You go listening to stories.
You reading me stories, depending. Yes. So tell me about the Blackwater. This is kind of a funny one because we had Cormac McCart pretty heavily involved in this, the Great King, but he's not very much seen as a good guy in this story.
Well, this is one of the interesting complexities that you get in Irish mythology.
There is no good.
What is a good guy?
There is no bad.
Well, kinda. He's the High King. He's the High King who you may know from stories such as Cormac McCart and the Land of Promise, which God knows we must have told on this podcast at some point.
Definitely probably
did. Which episode it is now, I couldn't tell you, but it's in there somewhere. Cormac McCart is the name of the fella.
We're so helpful.
But he was the person who codified the Brehon laws and...
Codified or codified? Are you just saying codified?
I think it's codified.
Because rivers...
No, I think he codified it. I don't think it's anything to do with fish. I think he actually codified the Brehon laws. I think that's how you pronounce that. If that is not how you pronounce that, then he codified them.
Then you just made me think of cods. Cod?
I think, cod. You're a cod. So...
fish and chips.
Fish and chips. So, Cormac McCart, fish and chips, Brehon law.
Jesus. Okay. Fish and chips.
Fish and chips, the Brehon law. And he's kind of remembered as being a very good and wise king, but there's also a lot in his story. There's a lot of war because to be a high king of a place,
You got to kill a lot of people,
well, you got to make everybody else agree that you're the high king,
which involves killing a lot of people.
which sometimes involves force. But it's you know, again, it's Irish warfare where you're not doing like high body count warfare. You're doing single combat warfare. You're doing intimidation warfare. And I think the Blackwater is actually a pretty good
Great example of this.
example of it because it's
Let's not have an outright war, but
Yeah.
let's get these lads to bow down, bend the knee, and show some form of fealty to me because they have to, because they're going to need something to drink.
because I got magic and I made the water not be water anymore.
Disappear.
So
that's his
which is
tactic.
cool. It's a tactic. It's a pretty intense tactic.
Remind me, the River Blackwater in Munster.
The River Blackwater in Munster. Now, this is a little confusing for some of our listeners who may know of 2 or 3 other Blackwaters
Right.
on the island of Ireland. But there is a very large river. It's also called like on Owen Moor, like the big river. It's kind of its course for a lot of its trajectory. I don't know about rivers. But for a lot of the course of the river, it kind of runs parallel to the River Lee and north. And it comes from Kerry.
The McGillicuddy Reeks.
The McGillicuddy Reeks, yes. But it drains, it's one of those things where, the river does not go to the closest exit to the sea, which would be over the mountains because they don't go uphill. And they don't think about it that way because they're rivers. They don't think. They're just following gravity. So it's going in a pretty straight line east.
East, yeah.
I always have to stop and go west or east.
I literally saw the cogs
you saw me
turning.
do the calculation in my head. So
you were spelling we in your.
I was literally spelling west to east. Okay, so it's going east from the west, and then similar, like I said, similar to the River Lee that flows in the same direction and kind of comes straight out in Cork Harbour. The Blackwater is north of there, and then it just really sharply doglegs south and hits Youghal. So it's this great, big, long, broad river. It
doesn't hit you all. It hits a place in County Cork called Youghal. Just for the American listeners.
Hits Youghal in the face.
Youghal in the face.
Hits Youghal upside the back of the head.
It hit me in the face. I don't know about that. Sorry.
No.
I'm done.
No accents.
Okay, no accents. We're done.
Not doing any more accents.
Sorry, y'all.
So it hits Youghal. And y'all are wet then. And that's y'all just have to deal with it.
Y'all just got Blackwater in the face.
So we were looking at this and it's one of those, like a lot of the rivers in Ireland are like a lot of the rivers in Ireland. It is an important ecological area,
and it clearly is kind of shown by that in the, like, okay, you and your Munster guys need this river to survive, and if I use my druids, as Cormac McCartan in the story does, to dry it up, then you're not going to be able to do anything.
And it's not just drinking. It's not just drinking water. It's also like it goes through a stand of yew forest, which is apparently like is the only yew forest in Europe, in Western Europe. Like it's a really rare little ecosystem. Like a lot of rivers, it's got a lot of those kind of like micro ecological spots
which
along it.
Which is actually a gorgeous thing to find out.
A lot of freshwater mussels, which apparently used to be in every river in Ireland, but are super sensitive to pollution, and so there are a lot of places that there aren't. A lot of otters, a lot of salmon. Lot of salmon, a lot of freshwater salmon, which again, all of these things have been, impacted by agriculture, by industry, by people, by human activity.
Humans.
But it was that was kind of why I wanted to lead on the, like, it's a protected river now. And I really liked the idea, like in the story, the King of Munster there's a stretch on it that is a kingdom. I can't remember the name of the kingdom off the top of my head now. But he gives that bit of it to Mograth the Druid, who's also associated with Valentia Island and Kerry. Those are his 2 kind of like big places. But I just kind of like the idea of linking the modern protection to the like ancient mystical protection of this like crazy figure who's very in that way of like, when you get the Christian influence coming in, he's sort of seen as an antagonist in a lot of the stories because he's the druidiest druid who will not change and is linked with a character called Simon Magus, who's like a kind of famous heretic sorcerer type person. And they build a flying machine. Like Mograth has this like Rovok, which is a big wheel that flies.
Rovok.
which we came across on the Samhain story as well.
Yeah. No, Mograth he's thereabouts in a few different.
He's around a few of them, but again, he's kind of like a difficult character to pin down. Like there's a lot of stories that put him in kind of a negative light. And he's more of a figure. Now Daithí Ó hÓgáin, whose book we were using for a lot of the research for this episode, reckons that he's like maybe a descendant of a sun god. Like he's maybe a deity that has been, downgraded to druid because of the flying wheel. Right. Like that kind of links to the sun. He's also often called either one-eyed or blind, and that idea of like the one eye and the eye of the sun being a thing that he's connecting as well. So interesting figure.
So
lots to him.
Again,
but the thing that was kind of like interesting to me again was like that thing of like the protection of the waterways being super important.
And I guess what jumped out to me even when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, so someone might take away that power and that beauty and that kind of abundance from the landscape in quite a literal form in the story, but those that are local to it, those that know the magics of the waterways, like Mograth in this, very metaphorically, can bring back the water, bring back the power, can bring back the ecological bounty that comes with it, and all the life and sustenance and survival that kind of goes along with it. And so that's kind of like the end result of that story is they are able to survive without having a massive conflict as well. And
seemingly the siege of Knocklion, I was not terribly clear on whether they actually had a fight or not.
They seem to just have a standoff and go,
I kind of went for a standoff. I kind of decided it was more interesting if it was a standoff, if they were just like, hey, we've outmaneuvered you, and then the other guy being like, hey, no you didn't.
What you going to do now?
What you going to do now? Okay, I'm going to go.
I
guess I'll just go. Because I think that's also kind of truer to how, we often talk about the Táin being the famous exception.
Yeah.
Because it's a battle. And most of the fights in Irish kind of mythology and they're not pitched battles. They're not fucking Braveheart fellas running across the field with each other.
It comes up again and again and again, doesn't it?
Again and again. So I kind of wanted to actually illustrate that in a story directly of them being like,
how can we get a way of avoiding mass slaughter, but also gaining the loyalty and the respect and the kowtowing.
It's a scene of saber rattling and then both sides backing off and going, okay, we're leaving the status quo as it is.
I do kind of love that though. It's like,
we're going to snarl, we're going to posture, we're going to make some moves around the sides to hobble your supply lines.
Like seriously.
And then when that doesn't work, we're going to go because it didn't work.
It didn't.
It
super didn't work. The lads down in Cork were like, all right, guys, we got our Blackwater back. I just zoomed there from Cork. So, yeah, I mean, it ties in brilliantly with what's happening this weekend, which will be in the past when you listen to it. But at the same time, I've mentioned it a few times, Gaelic Woodland Project are trying to get a River Boyne clean up this weekend. So I'll be attending that. And, there'll be a few of those things we'll try and post and share about it as well. I think getting the communities out to actually clean up the river, putting pressure on farmers not to completely destroy it, on the meat factories to not just throw all their waste into the River Boyne, which has been happening. The cleanup is quite simple. Like it's just picking up rubbish around the skirts of the bank, which is amazing. How much you can collect with a good few hands. So it's just that kind of like the mythic power of Mograth, of bringing the water back, is quite a metaphor for community spirit and actually being able to go in and bring back some of the sovereignty to these rivers and waterways of this beautiful island that we are on, which is so littered with water.
Rivers and lakes and waters. We're very boggy.
It's just
it's that thing, and I think it's kind of, there's a lot of despair around the climate that I think is kind of can be hard to escape sometimes, but I think it's important to remember that there is a huge capacity in nature for renewal if we can get out of the way of it and facilitate it a little bit. A little goes an awfully long way.
And it is that like combined effort can just, like you said, go huge distance and can make a massive effect. So and it's just about getting into people's minds as well of like actually it's an uphill struggle, but just keep on walking.
There's no simple thing, but it is, it's one foot in front of the other. And like the the things that we know is like conservation efforts work and rehabilitation efforts, they work.
Yeah, they work.
They do what they're supposed to do. They just tend to be, because it's boring and hard and you have to keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's like fucking brushing your teeth. Like nobody wants to do it.
Well,
but it's like, you know,
it's not.
it doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's a continuous effort. But like it works. It's just we have to do it and keep doing it.
I had the most kind of beautiful moment this weekend with our mother. I was planting potatoes and helping her clear out the beds and all the rest of it. And
you guys planted, by the way, so many potatoes.
Many potatoes.
So many
carrots,
potatoes.
onions, and beets.
So many potatoes. I was looking at that and being like, "That's a lot of spuds."
But they're gonna first the what are they called? Not the.
Oh, they're gonna come up at different times.
Yeah,
are
the
they?
roosters will come up later, and the other ones, the something pinks.
Kira's pinks.
Kira's pinks will come up
earlier.
They're the fluffy, flowery ones.
The potato hour.
Sorry. The reason I'm getting into it is because while we were doing that, Mum had found an acorn that had actually begun to sprout. It was in the ground. It was in really fertile soil down her friends underneath the tree. So we took it and kind of basically I was like, oh, cool. Put it in some really nice compost, in a pot and planted it. And like the act of planting trees is such a beautiful long-term gain that it removes you and ego from it completely, because that tree, if it survives, will outlive me unbelievably. It is about leaving behind something that will have a far longer life and sustainable thing than you will ever have. And we continuously underestimate or overestimate, I think, well, certainly I do anyway, what can be done in a day. And like I overestimate and try and do things in a day that I can never get done.
Yes.
And then underestimate what can be massively achieved with long-term persistence over the course of a year to years. So like a little, and God knows I know this from my knee rehab, a little bit goes a long way if it's repeated like every second day, even not every day,
Not even have to do every day, but like, the kind of persistence. I think we had that with, a couple of episodes ago when we hit 200 and we were like, Jesus, that's a hell of a lot of podcasts from. But it is that thing of like it's intermittent effort, and we're trying to get 2 or 3 done in a day now and get systematic about it. But it is that thing of like a persistent effort over time is always going to get you a lot farther than trying to do everything all at once, which I think we both do a lot of. All or nothing, everything all at once, or nothing at all.
Get it all done right now.
Yeah, it's a tough lesson for some of us to learn. To play the long game, but it's very important when it comes to the environment.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the importance of those rivers and lakes and waterways in our folklore. I think they're really the Blackwater in the story is much more kind of seen as, I guess, a resource for the people of Munster.
Yeah.
But they're also passages. They're also liminal spaces. They're also, entries to the other world.
Absolutely. And there is something like, like talking about entries into the other world, the story of Loch Sheelin or Loch Sheelin, the lake of the fairy pool, which is the story I'll be telling. It will be like very much a passage into the other world. And I think when you go to lakes or rivers or waterways, even seas, you're looking out at a very beautiful, calming place where you get to just sit and watch and be at peace with nature. And that's where like that kind of otherworldly perspective can come in, as we were talking about in the last episode. And I guess this going to the underhill or escaping into the other world or trying to get there is very much, going from one big long river, the Blackwater, which is huge and spans from Kerry to Cork. We're going up now to the start in Cavan. Loch Sheelin is one of the lakes that runs in, it's all connected madly enough through a few different lakes into Loch Derg and the Shannon. And on that whole Shannon massive waterway can all be linked back up if you were to stay on the lakes and the rivers, as the Vikings famously did when they came to Ireland and pillaged and plundered and saw how easy it was to get up and down the rivers all over Ireland with their narrow little shallow boats, and how all interconnected it is and how mythical some of those places are. And the story of the Loch Sheelin has a gorgeous little, well, kind of double take on stories from the Meath Folk Tales written by Richard Marsh, an old friend of ours. And
yes, indeed. Richard used to come to our shows a lot a few years back, and is a fantastic folklorist, and has written some fantastic books about Irish myth and Irish folklore, which he does a very good job of like collecting and citing, and like the stories about Loch Sheelin were collected.
From,
and I think Richard translated them in the book. So yeah, if people are interested, I think we are probably going to drop a few sources in the show notes of where to find some more of these stories, which we don't always do, because sometimes if we come across a story like for the first time 5 or 6 years ago, and someone's like, "Where did you come across that?" It's like, "Oh, I read it in a book 5 or 6 years ago," and then, or usually somebody told me about it after a show, and then I went and looked it up, and I found like 4 different versions of it, and I don't remember where any of them are.
According to this, Phil Lynch, 82, Rathmore, told these 2 stories to a collector, D.F. O'Sullivan, in 1938. And then
So
was
there you go.
translated. So
There you go. So you kind of put them together, and that you've put the character from the second story into the first story.
Well,
as a witness.
I didn't really want to. I guess the story, like, they're 2 different stories. They're very similar. It's the kind of
Well, it's the same place.
Same place, and it's very similar to the Land Under Wave. There's many stories. The Gay Horse is one. The Diarmuid and Daughter Under Wave is another. You have many more.
Yeah, the Merrow one as well.
Merrow one, of course. Yeah. What's the name of the Merrow one again?
I always just call it the Merrow.
So there was 2 little stories. One being about somebody's uncle, and how her aunt had a little pot, and that was proof from down below in the water. A diver had gone down and found it and kind of come back with this proof. So it's kind of, that's it. I don't know. It's one of those stories that doesn't really have any human emotion to it. There's no real...
It does. There's a big old chase with a fish.
It's a chase with a fish, and your man is shook
chase,
for
and your
years.
man is shook, and he goes from being fascinated with the lake to being like afraid of the lake.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, so like there's a bit, all right.
There's just more in the other one, I guess.
There's just more. The other one, I think we both kind of looked at it and said there's a bit more substance in the other one. But I like the fact that you're like, this becomes then the lore of the place that the student comes into, that he is like aware of but not convinced by.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing of the outsider coming into the community and being like, what's happening? I also I'm very down with just the shape-shifting in Irish folklore and mythology is very fun. And very wild,
again, this idea that this student is fishing there, knows that there's rumours and stories about kind of a pool of fairies or a town down below underneath it, and there's some proof or some stories about it. And one fellow who got scared witless, and not really taking it all that seriously, but then having this encounter and half catching this fish lady that has a crush.
Well, that's the thing. She's not a fish lady. Sometimes she's a fish,
big old fish,
and sometimes she's a lady. Mm-hmm. And there's like,
no,
I always find it very fun when that happens in Irish folklore, because there's no kind of like transformation moment.
No,
it's just when you're on top of the lake, she a fish, and when you're under the lake, she a lady. And there's no like, here's the time when she changes.
No, there's not.
There's no like, even a lot of the time when there is transformation, it's like you take off the skin of the animal and your human features are underneath, and you put it back on over your human features.
But it's a nice...
So like you stay human on the inside all the time. But I think there's something very fun to me about like, no, just sometimes she's, because it kind of connects to what that's the Voyage of Bran thing with the silver branch.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And Manannán being like, you see a wave, I see a field.
Yeah.
Like, you see a fish, I see a lady.
Well, I think the silver branch perspective thing is slightly different. It's that invitation to see the magic where, the mundane can be possibly perceived, or the greyness.
But it's that doubling of vision as well. Like it's that kind of poetic thing of like, see the beauty and the magic of the everyday is one part of it. But I think there's also kind of quite a literal part of it that's like, there's another world. Stuff is actually different than you perceive it. Which again is a big trope in folklore of like the fairy site, or people who are like Like Mugroth and his blindness in one eye is a big kind of deal with that, where he's like, he's got one eye and it's blind, but he's seeing through it. He's seeing fucking something.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's seeing, but he's definitely seeing something.
And I hope I can do this kind of justice in terms of you kind of triggered something when we were chatting about this story in terms of like he's seeing a lake and he's walking into it. He's going to go back and get his swimming togs, and your man, the other
brother.
fish man, mer person, is like, no, it's fine, don't worry about it. And he walks into the water, he doesn't get wet, and then suddenly they're under this is what it's kind of funny about these stories. They don't give you the detail, they don't give you the immersive experience of what it's like to go into that. Whereas in Diarmuid and the Daughter Under Wave, he jumps all the way down onto this plain of where people are collecting reeds.
You have that thing in the Mirror
The
story as
journey.
well, where like you gotta swim down, and it's the same as Sons of Terran. I think you have to swim down through the ocean, like you got to free dive until you're about to die, and then you will pop through the bubble of the country under wave, and then you're able to breathe.
And then you're standing looking up at the sea. And
the sea is the sky.
Yeah.
Whereas this, to me, this suggested more this idea of like a mirror.
Which I love,
There is a kind of an inverted world underneath.
The upside down world type thing.
Something like that.
And because it's not described, and because it's so loose, and because, again, we get the poetic license within Irish mythology and folk tales to recreate or reconstruct that kind of thing. The idea that I'm trying to get to when I'm telling this story will be this subverted looking down, looking up, falling in between, not knowing how you're entering into that liminal place in between worlds, and like that which is always skipped in these stories. You just you're here and then you're there.
Actually,
the journey
there with the moment and the threshold and the vertigo and the inversion and the no, that will be fun.
That's slipping upside down, and then of course we have that weird and beautiful like flip between that character, this fish lady who's fallen in love with our student, and it's completely different to what you usually have in the Mero stories.
Yeah. I love it when that happens, because it's just like, fairy creatures are very wonderful and enticing to mortals, and according to these stories, the reverse is like also true. Like Fish Lady is like, no, I'm in love. I've been in love with you since I first saw you in a boat.
That's why I kept on trying to drown you,
to capsize you. Well, I'm not drowning you. I've been trying to capsize you so you would stay with me, so that we can meet.
But there's this underlying threat continuously of like, so that I would get you in the water and you would be mine forever.
That is how she phrases it.
And her brother says, like, if she knocked you into the water, you'd be hers.
You'd be hers.
And that's why he's asked him to promise, make sure I can get back.
Yeah.
I'll go help your sister, but I can come back.
But and then it's interesting that they're like, I think it's a very fun one where it's like that Selkie seal wife, crane wife in some cultures story of like marrying the otherworld woman who will leave your ass at the first fucking sign of her red cap or her feather cape or whatever it is she's missing. This woman is just like, yeah, I'll come up and marry you. The second I see water, I'm leaving you forever and you will be so sad. Or you could come live with me.
And drop everything. And
leave all of your friends and family behind forever. And just be mine underwater forever.
And he's like, you're very pretty.
But
and
no.
I nearly said yes to you coming up, for a while, because that'd be great fun for a bit. But the whole being sad forever doesn't sound great. So,
yeah.
You know what?
Fairy women are...
Thanks for the advance warning on this one.
Yeah.
Because that usually never happens.
There's also like, I think there's also such a kind of undercurrent in some of the Selkie stories of just like non-consensual, like,
Oh, yeah.
sealskin stealing, where it's like, she left that guy, and whenever I come across those retellings, I'm like, good. I'm glad she left him. I guess that sucks for their kids, but I'm glad she left him.
Yeah.
People should leave.
So like, and
people should leave bad relationships. Is my hot take always.
Of course, with the sheep people under the water here seem like to have a mild threat. The student learns about your man who got shook, who got given the pot, who he walks into a house and an old woman says, "Get the hell out of here, because if the lads come back and find you, you're never going back."
There is that real sense of like, yeah, these are fairy folk who are. But again, like all of the good folk in the stories, you don't mess with them. You don't go seek them out. And you kind of hope that they don't pay attention to you.
Yeah.
Because if they pay attention to you, their attention comes in the form of, I would like to capsize your boat and just have you on my little shelf forever because I like you.
Or I, whatever, might not, and whatever the lads would have done with him.
Or the guy in the
like,
first story being like, well, the lads did not sound like it was gonna be a fun time for him. That sounded like, oh, you've trespassed and you're gonna die now.
Yeah. Or be stuck in a cage forever.
Or be locked up.
Whatever. We don't know. Again, we don't have the details. So not all sheep people are as twisted, but again, you wanted to educate me on, where people, where folk,
Oh, yeah. Well, we're calling this Wer-Creatures.
Wer-Creatures.
Because werfolk is, because
the
redundant.
The ware is another weird expression that my granny used to use for cutlery.
That's a different spelling of the word were. You know it,
yes.
motherfucker.
Sounds the same though.
Get out of this recording studio. No, we were talking.
That would annoy you.
We were talking. Yeah, I did. Congratulations. Yes. I'm gonna kick you now.
You can't because you'll sear it. Oh, damn it! Get out.
Lightly kicking Aaron.
Okay.
I don't have a good angle. That's not satisfying. Yeah, because we were talking about the title of this episode. Because I was like, we need more titles that aren't just like chats about waterways. Because we've done 3 now. So
if you have any ideas, pop
waterways and Wer-Creatures were what we came up with. Because, as some of you may know, in Werewolf, the were bit is the bit that means man. Because the word man used to be gender neutral.
Oh yeah, mankind.
And mankind just meant humankind, and were-man and wife-man were the ways you would gender that word.
Wife-man.
Wife-man.
As
WYF. Wife didn't mean wife. It didn't mean spouse.
What did wife mean?
Wife-man meant woman.
Oh. Sorry, I missed that. I kind of zoned out while you were speaking. Hang on.
Oh, this is why I've had to explain this to you 7 times and you're confusing it with cutlery.
It's just, I'm a bit tired today. Okay, so werewolf, man-wolf.
Yeah, werewolf means man-wolf.
But
so
gender neutral.
No.
Not now. But then.
Where
Yeah.
means man.
Man-wolf.
As in male person.
Damn it. Okay.
Wolf.
But
so
originally,
I guess,
no.
Do you know
Did
what
that
we
not
have? No.
Gender neutral thing?
Man is the bit that's gender neutral.
Right.
The way that you would make it about a male person is you would say, where man.
Okay. I hope you've all followed this very clearly the 14th time.
He's getting it explained to him again. So technically what we have here is you have a story about a wife fish.
That's true.
And I have a story about some werewolves.
Ah.
Yeah?
Nice.
Yeah? Did you get it?
I like
you
it.
there?
I like
you
it.
with
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
You with us?
with it,
You
with
caught up? You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Wife fish, not meaning
with
spouse.
fish.
With fish.
Yes. Anyway, etymology of English language is a tangent.
You've got your werewolves being in the place of Osprey, and we've tried to tell this story a few times in the podcast.
We've kind of come across it before, and it's not I find it a bit of an unsatisfying story. Now, Daithí reckons that werewolf lore is like not indigenous to Ireland, and that this is kind of generally an imported idea, although wolves are important in the mythology and they're important in the stories. And like in the story of, for instance, Cormac MacArt, who's one of those like raised by wolves fellas, the Irish for wolf being Mac Tíre, which means the son of the land.
And he was literally raised by wolves.
Kind of an important like concept, son of land, as like a sort of a guardian creature.
For sure.
So, I mean, we did have wolves. We don't have wolves anymore. There are no wolves in Ireland and have not been for a long time. But
because there was a bounty or it was like a price for killing wolves and stuff.
Humans and wolves don't coexist particularly comfortably.
Babies do get eaten.
We may have talked about this before,
I think we did.
Yeah. Like everybody's all for reintroducing wolves on their islands until the wolves start eating their pets and then their like kids.
Which
Because that's what wolves do. They eat little things. So if you're, it's
FYI.
it's a good idea. I still think we should do it. Controversial
Absolutely.
opinion. We have enough. We have enough humans.
True.
You know,
Okay, so setting the
fine.
scene of this, we've got the three sisters, the North Shore, the Barrow.
North Shore and the Barrow are the three sisters. They're three rivers. Tipperary is the county.
Yeah. Still in Munster,
Still in Munster,
south of Ireland.
south of Ireland. And two of them, the Nore and the Barrow, are the boundaries. We'll come across this again later. Some of these rivers are like territorial markers, even to this day. So the Nore and the Barrow basically make a kind of a V, a little wedge shape, with the northern part being topped by the Slieve Bloom Mountains and the first bit of the River Barrow, which does another kind of dogleg, where it's like first flowing east and then flowing south.
Yeah.
Makes a little triangle in Tipperary that was the kingdom of Ossory.
Yeah, if you imagine a V shape, basically.
Yeah, it's basically a little wedge.
Yeah.
Basically a little wedge in Tipperary, which was kind of like wild territory. And it was is remembered in folklore as being one of those kingdoms that was a holdout. That one of those kingdoms that like took a long time to convert, took a long time to be conquered, took a long time for like any new stuff to kind of take
they
hold
had
of.
two rivers and they just had to protect one angle. Like, so.
And I think that's kind of why, like you get that there are pockets in Ireland of like, you get the same thing in Leitrim where it's like it's mountainous and people could just retreat up the mountains and there was a lot of guerrilla warfare.
Lovely Leitrim.
Like there's different places in Ireland where it's like this is where the wild people are, and those kind of ideas tend to go back to like colonial times when people were trying to conquer those areas and people were like, no, this is a super defensible area. Fuck you.
Yeah.
We are gonna win and we're gonna hold out for longer. So there's this sort of idea of the people of Ossory being like kind of bestial and frightening and wolf-like. And there's sort of two different stories. One I think we may have told on the podcast before is a very much Christian era legend of there's a travelling saint going through Ossory and he meets a wolf that talks to him and asks for help. Mm-hmm. And the story is that the people of Ossory were so bad and pagan and wicked that they were cursed by a saint, that for 7 years one man and one woman would be in the form of wolves and they would be cursed to remain in the form of wolves for 7 years, and then they'd be able to come back home if they survived and another couple would take their place. And this wolf basically begs him to give the woman who is a wolf like last rites because she's injured, she's dying, which he does, and that removes the curse? Question mark. In some versions that removes the curse. In some versions it doesn't.
It lasts. And in some versions I think it gets passed on. There's like they keep on having to get more. That's
kind of the original version of the curse, is that like it's a 7-year sentence, but
there always has to be somebody.
Somebody's always wolves.
Yeah.
Somebody is always wolves, and it's a 7-year. It's a 7-year
cycle.
term.
Yeah, you're gonna have to. It's your turn to do the 7 years to be a wolf.
Yeah, you got to be a wolf for the next 7 years.
God damn it! Really? No, but it's kind of like it's again. They do shapeshift. They do change shape. They become their human form, and they can be hurt.
Well, it's that weird. No, because you're confusing it now with the next one. Fuck. In the Ossory wolves, they are physically wolves. But in the story with the saint, the male wolf peels back the female wolf's wolf skin to show her human skin beneath.
Wow.
And that's what convinces him to give her like the host, the Holy Communion. But no, the other story about Ossory has to do with the voluntary shapeshifting, where they don't actually shapeshift. They kind of do a version of, I guess it's like the George R.R. Martin thing of like warging, where you like they send their consciousness into a wolf.
Well, this has been taken up by Wolf Walkers.
That's where they got that idea from.
The beautiful animation movie by Cartoon Saloon, which is very much that exact trope, that idea of leaving consciousness and going into the body of a wolf.
So that idea is that this is a more voluntary thing, but it's quite risky. Because their human bodies are left behind and are left vulnerable. So they're not able to like wake up easily.
Classic.
And if their human bodies are touched, they're not able to come back into them at all.
Touched.
touched
Like at all.
at all.
Like anyone just goes over and like,
Go over and poke them, and they're not able to come back in.
wow.
Which again is like, you know, it's a high risk proposition. It's one of which I think is kind of, that to me is quite characteristic of Irish myth, where it's like great power has great risk. Like there's all that kind of stuff with Gasa and power. Like the more powerful you are, the more powerful the prohibitions on you, the more powerful the constraints. So you have this kind of, yeah, there's that idea. And then it's got your typical werewolf stuff of like any harm that is done to the wolf carries over to the body of the person. So like if the wolf is injured, the injury shows up on the human body, even though they are physically separate. And if the wolf dies, the person dies. And there was a cool bit of like, if the wolf eats an animal and has raw meat stuck between its teeth, the person will have raw meat stuck between their teeth the next day.
Nice,
which is just very visceral of like, I got something in my teeth. Oh, it's a bit of raw rabbit that I ate while I was a wolf last night, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of, I wasn't particularly interested in telling the saint version of the story because I don't
it's a bit
think it's particularly...
preachy.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a particularly interesting story. Like it's weird.
It's weird. It's one of those stories that you get again and again, and like you're like, oh, there's someone even we're getting a request to tell the story with the Poddle, or which by the way keep sending in any requests or rivers or waterways that you have in mind, and we are doing the research to find it. But sometimes it's so sparse that you get a little bit of a tad bit that kind of goes into, the tour tidbit, whatever. Tadpole tidbit. We would go into a nice walking tour of the locale, which you can kind of summarize and say, but it's not a chunky enough story to elongate.
It's not a chunky enough story. I feel like the Werewolves of Ossory story, the same story is just, I don't find it particularly inspiring. So what I wanted to do with
I like what you're going with, John.
Instead was basically do it as kind of a more sort of classic folktale horror story of like, here are the rules. You are in a dangerous situation. If you follow the rules, you will make it out alive. And if you don't follow the rules, wolves.
So that's going to
So that was kind of the way that I decided to go with that, of like making it a bit more, making it feel a bit more experiential from the point of view of someone. So it's a little bit of a slant on our sort of waterways thing, because these are waterways that are bounding the territory where the story happens.
Yeah.
But I still liked it. I still want to kind of like make the crossing of the rivers like important.
I think it's
in that story.
Because it's come up enough within the Three Sisters, within the northern shore.
The northern shore and the Barrow are the Three Sisters. This is the Barrow and the Nor. The shore is like farther over to the west and joins
further
them.
south. Yeah.
It's southwest of the other two.
But I guess it's not like it's calling out for that reinterpretation, as the Wolfwalkers movie would show. Like there's not enough of a story there, but there's great ingredients in order for you to take it on and create something that is much more kind of immersive, I guess. And still being loyal to the rules of the magic within the story, and try and land in. So I'm looking forward to hearing it. As
I'm
creepy
looking
as
forward
it
to
will be.
finding out what I say.
More to come on our Waterways podcast. We're going to be delving into River Delvin soon enough, which is the border of the Dublin and Meath, which also comes up again, and I'm not sure if we're going to have a chance. We'll talk about it in our next chat about the Cuchulainn and Emer chat-up line, where he mentions loads of places and rivers and waterways.
Yeah, that's a I feel like that is, we'll talk about that in the chat rather than trying to make that into a story, because somebody just banged against the side of the studio. Apologies for that.
But
that
that's
gave me a fright.
That's
our cue to wrap up. So you can find us on Patreon, you can find us on podcasts, you can find us on YouTube, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, you can support us, you can just listen, and thank you very much for listening.
And we will be having a story of the River Lee as well, from the source. I'm getting it from the source.
You are getting it from the horse's mouth. From the mouth of a person.
Planning on telling today, but apparently there's just a better story, and I've sent a link, and now my friend is going to put me in touch with someone who knows the story, who's going to tell it to me, and I can't wait. And more to follow, more research, more stories coming for your lovely ears. Keep safe, keep sound, and always keep her lit. You.